The heat rising off the Nevada blacktop shimmered like a mirage. Dust devils, smaller than a man but full of malice, spun across the arid landscape carrying the fine red grit of the Mojave. Elias Vance didn't belong here. He was a creature of glass and steel, his world defined by the cool, hushed hum of server rooms and the meticulous logic of data restoration. Yet, here he was, crouched outside a derelict, weather-beaten structure that looked like a bad set piece from an old B-movie about the Cold War. It wasn't a job for the faint of heart or for the legally minded. Elias was an information archaeologist, a specialist hired for the impossible, to recover digital ghosts. His client was an anonymous trust, registered through a chain of shell companies stretching from Delaware to Zurich, all pointing back to a single cryptic instruction: retrieve all non-biological materials from designated site with extreme prejudice for secrecy. The pay was exorbitant. The penalty for discovery, unspecified but terrifying, was a built-in warning. The structure was an old private fallout shelter, one of hundreds built during the paranoia of the 1950s, but this one was different. It wasn't a family bunker. The thick, reinforced steel door and the heavy-duty ventilation system spoke of government-grade security. A faded, almost completely oxidized metal plaque beside the entry bore the single chilling designation, Project Oracle, Site 41. Elias ran a scanner over the door. 70 years of corrosion, 5 major seismic events, and a locking mechanism that hasn't seen a drop of oil since Eisenhower was in office, he muttered to himself, his voice muffled by the desert silence. He set down his customized tool case, a sleek, matte black Pelican container that held the 21st century tools of his trade. Forget crowbars and dynamite. Elias used diamond-tipped micro drills and thermic lances, surgical precision over brute force. 2 hours later, sweat plastering his fine-knit shirt to his back, he was inside. The air that rushed out was stale, dry, and cold, a preserved pocket of the past. The interior was a shock of fluorescent white paint and polished aluminum, miraculously free of the dust and decay that claimed the outside world. It was a time capsule. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with tins of peaches, water purification tablets, and Geiger counters. But Elias wasn't interested in canned goods. He walked past the rudimentary living quarters and the cramped radio room. His target was the sealed inner sanctum. It was a small room, even more heavily reinforced, and in the center sat a single, massive piece of technology, a refrigerator-sized, custom-built computer from the late 1950s, humming faintly. The computer, he knew from his client brief, was an early prototype, a hybrid analog-digital system that was supposed to be a fail-safe repository for critical national security data. It was beautiful. A leviathan of vacuum tubes, spinning magnetic drums, and blinking amber lights. But it was the small, unassuming object sitting on a wooden desk next to the computer that stole his breath. It was a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age, secured with a tarnished brass clasp. The cover was blank, save for a hand-inked message in the bottom corner. For the messenger who remembers. Elias put on a pair of white archival gloves. He was here for the data, the electrons locked in the ancient machine, but the historian in him, the part that loved the tactile truth of the past, compelled him to open the journal first. He carefully undid the clasp. The air, already heavy with the scent of ozone and old paper, seemed to thicken. The first page was a faded but meticulous hand-drawn map of Washington, D.C., with several obscure locations circled in red. The next pages were dense, elegant script, a rambling, increasingly frantic series of journal entries. Entry 1, July 12, 1958. The Oracle is a success. My code is secure, my protocols are in place. The data we have stored here, the truth about what happened in 47, the scope of their influence, it is too volatile for the public. Too dangerous for the White House. It must be held in stasis until a moment of pure, unbiased national desperation. I am the only one left who understands the architecture, the only one who knows the key. I pray the messenger finds this before it's too late. Elias's pulse hammered against his ribs. 47? Roswell? The vague references hinted at something far grander and more terrifying than just Cold War contingency planning. He flipped several pages to the last legible entry, dated 3 days later, July 15, 1958. Entry 4, July 15, 1958. They know I am leaving. I hear the choppers in the distance, a low thrumming that shakes the dust from the ducts. They can have the mainframe. It is inert without the sequence. The real data, the one that tells the full story of the project, is not here. It is fragmented, encoded in 7 separate locations, 7 dead drops disguised as harmless historical markers across the United States. I have listed the first 3 below. My only hope rests on the messenger. He/she must follow the data, retrieve the whole truth, and release it. The system is designed to trigger a total wipe if I don't check in by the end of the month. I am the key. I am the last. The writing stopped abruptly, smeared with a dark, reddish-brown stain that Elias recognized with a sickening lurch. Dried blood. Elias wasn't just on a retrieval job anymore. He was holding the opening clue to a decades-old, potentially explosive government secret, a story that crisscrossed the entire American landscape, hidden in plain sight. The anonymous client didn't just want data. They wanted the completion of a mission that began with the forgotten messenger. He stood up, looking at the monolithic computer. It wasn't the data on the machine that was the most valuable artifact. It was the man who wrote the journal. And now, Elias, the unassuming information archaeologist, had been drafted into his impossible, half-century-old final message.
Elias stared at the screen, a cold dread washing over the relief. This wasn't a simple treasure hunt. It was a complex, cryptic puzzle designed by a paranoid genius in a bunker. He was holding 3 numbers that could refer to anything from the year Napoleon died to the specific gravity of the moon. He packed up his gear, leaving the Oracle mainframe humming faintly again, exactly as he found it. The desert sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. Back in his unmarked rental SUV, parked miles away and disguised with a layer of fine dust, Elias opened his satellite data link, a powerful, military-grade connection masked as a rural internet antenna. He needed a place to think, a place where he could cross-reference obscure historical facts against a vast global database. He knew the perfect location, a forgotten, cash-only motel near the former mining town of Tonopah, Nevada, a place where anonymity was a currency. He drove for 3 hours through the empty Nevada night, the air conditioning struggling against the perpetual heat. With the journal on the passenger seat and the coded numbers flashing on his tablet, Elias began his deep dive. The journal's author, whom Elias mentally dubbed the architect, was meticulous. He wouldn't have used arbitrary numbers. Elias needed to find events, places, or dates in American history that precisely matched those numerical values. He ran searches, filtering for historical events tied to the numbers. 1814.15. Too precise for a date. It must be a measurement, or perhaps a currency figure. He tried land area. No. Casualty count. No. He tried distance. 1814.15 miles. Miles from where? He started cross-referencing significant historical landmarks in D.C. with the mileage. Frustration mounted. 1907.36. This felt like a year and a month. 1907, March 6th? Maybe. He searched major events in 1907. Panic of 1907. Opening of Ellis Island's new facilities. Nothing clicked. 1777.90. A definite pre-revolutionary date. 1777. September 1777. The Battle of Saratoga, perhaps? He searched historical markers tied to 1777. Still too broad. Elias leaned back, rubbing his temples. He was approaching the puzzle from a 21st century perspective, trying to force the numbers into a digital template. The architect was a cold warrior, a man who worked with paper, ink, and intuition. He looked at the digital final entry again. Must be aligned with the right historical context to yield the coordinates. He realized his mistake. The context had to be the same for all three numbers. They were part of a single, unified system. What if the numbers weren't quantities, but catalog numbers? Elias began a new set of searches, this time focusing on major, public-facing, yet largely unexamined historical archives in the United States: the Library of Congress, the National Archives, the Smithsonian Institution. He started with the Library of Congress, the LOC. The LOC had millions of entries cataloged by precise accession numbers. He keyed in the first number, LOC accession 1814.15. The search results snapped onto the screen, blindingly clear. A 1787 hand-drawn map of the original 13 colonies by cartographer Silas Marsh, detailing the proposed location for the new capital city on the Potomac River. Bingo. Context: early American cartography. He tried the second number, LOC accession 1907.36. Result: a 1907 blueprint of the Washington, D.C. Union Station complex, specifically detailing the sub-basement freight tunnels. He tried the third number, LOC accession 1777.90. Result: a 1777 receipt for the purchase of land from the Piscataway tribe by a colonial surveyor named John Vance. Elias froze. Vance. The last name was an unbelievably specific, highly improbable match. It could be coincidence, but in the context of a hidden data trail left by a man obsessed with secrecy, Elias knew it was a deliberate beacon. The architect's message was clear. The map is the blueprint. The tunnels are the path. The land receipt holds the coordinates. Elias pulled up the image of the 1777 land receipt. The bottom was stamped with the surveyor's seal and an obscure handwritten notation, the 41 degrees, 54 minutes, 12.6 arcseconds. This wasn't a coordinate. It was a specific latitude, a single line running across the country, crossing dozens of states, a vast invisible ribbon of land. Elias mapped a line, the 41st parallel, and cross-referenced it with the other two locations, the D.C. freight tunnels and Silas Marsh's early map. The coordinates weren't in D.C. They were at the intersection of a vast northern line and a very specific historical place connected to the architect's life. Elias had given the first three locations of the project's hidden data fragments, and the most shocking revelation was the simplest. The forgotten messenger was likely to be a direct descendant of the architect, a member of the Vance lineage. Elias Vance, the information archaeologist, had stumbled not only onto the greatest secret of the Cold War, but into his own impossible family history. The retrieval mission was now an intensely personal one. He looked at the GPS on his tablet. The 41st parallel crossed the United States. The first dead drop was far from the Nevada desert, located at the intersection of that line and the historical land detailed in the old receipt. The target was a small, historically preserved town in Wyoming, near Cheyenne, an old surveyor's marker that had gone largely ignored for over a century, a place nobody would look twice at. Elias started the engine. The dust of the Mojave was settling behind him, but the dust of decades-old secrets was just beginning to stir. The drive from Nevada to Wyoming took a grinding 20 hours. Elias used the time to dig deeper into John Vance, the 18th century surveyor. The public record was sparse, a minor land agent, a footnote in colonial history. But Elias found an obscure Genealogical Society of America bulletin that mentioned a gap. John Vance had a son, but the records of the subsequent generations vanished entirely after the 1950s, a clean, deliberate slate. The architect hadn't just used his family name, he had erased it to protect his descendants, expecting the messenger to be the one to eventually rediscover the truth. The pieces were now falling together with terrifying clarity. Elias arrived in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and followed his coordinates 40 miles out to a desolate stretch of high prairie. The location was starkly beautiful, a vast, unbroken horizon beneath an enormous sky. The latitude, 41 degrees, 54 minutes, 12.6 arcseconds, intersected with a small, rusted iron spike, barely a foot high, marked with the faded Roman numeral I, the very first of the 7 markers. The spike was the dead drop. He ran a low-frequency sonar scan over the ground around the marker. 10 feet down, the density reading spiked, indicating a small, non-ferrous metal container sealed in concrete. The architect had hidden the data beneath a symbol of the very history he was trying to protect. Elias worked quickly and professionally. Using a handheld concrete saw and a portable vacuum excavator, tools that looked innocuous but were highly effective, he chipped away the earth and the century-old concrete. After an hour, he reached the container. It was a titanium box, no larger than a brick, secured with a combination lock. The lock wasn't mechanical. It was an early form of cipher wheel lock that required a numerical code.
Elias didn't panic. The architect wouldn't have used an arbitrary code. The key had to be related to the access number itself, 1814.15. He tried 181415. Click. Buzz. Wrong. He thought back to the context. The number referred to an old Library of Congress LOC accession number. The LOC had a specific 4-digit cipher for internal file access, a common security protocol in the 1950s that used the year of the document's accession plus the last 2 digits of the previous year's circulation total. Elias did an instantaneous deep search on the LOC's digital archive procedures for the 1950s. The common access cipher was accession year plus first 2 digits of the document's call number. The document's full call number was 1814.15-S87-C1958. The accession year, 1814, the year the document referenced, not the year it was accessioned. The first 2 digits of the call number, 87. He keyed in 181487. Click. The box opened. Inside, nestled on a bed of archival foam, was not a hard drive, but something far more fragile and dangerous. A small, high-density microfilm spool wrapped in a lead casing. The microfilm contained the first fragment of the project. Elias immediately transferred the spool to his portable scanner and ran the digital conversion. The images flickered onto his screen. Highly classified, government-issued documents, redacted and stamped "Majestic Eyes Only." The documents weren't about aliens or the Cold War. They were about weather control. Specifically, they were a detailed history of a 1950s atmospheric manipulation program codenamed Project Malleus, the Hammer. The program was designed not to make rain, but to create targeted, devastating microstorms for geopolitical leverage. It was theoretical, horrifying, and utterly illegal. But the most disturbing document wasn't the project summary. It was a personnel file for the head researcher of Project Malleus, Dr. Jonathan Vance. The architect was not just a Vance. He was Dr. Jonathan Vance, a leading American physicist erased from all records in 1958. The file detailed his growing opposition to the weaponization of his research, his attempts to blow the whistle, and the final chilling sentence. Subject designated hostile witness, elimination protocol approved by the Council of 7, see file J7. The data from the first dead drop didn't reveal a national secret. It revealed a shadow government. the Council of Seven that existed above the presidency and controlled the deadliest secrets of the post-war era. And they had murdered Elias's grandfather. The microfilm also contained the key to the second dead drop, a cryptic message appended to the end of the personnel file. Union Station, D.C. Find the place where the trains weep. The code is the date the tunnels first fell silent. The second location was confirmed, the Union Station sub-basement freight tunnels in Washington, D.C., and the code was based on a date of historical silence. Elias had his next target, Washington, D.C., the heart of the beast that consumed his ancestor. He secured the titanium box, leaving the surveyor's mark intact, and pulled his SUV back onto the highway. The vast, empty landscape of Wyoming was now less a place of natural beauty and more a silent witness to a 70-year-old conspiracy. The pace changed immediately upon entering the eastern United States. The Nevada desert's emptiness had been replaced by the smothering anonymity of the urban sprawl. Elias checked into a discreet extended-stay hotel in Arlington, Virginia, close enough to D.C. for quick access, but across the river and away from the immediate scrutiny of Capitol Hill. His first task was to research the history of the Union Station freight tunnels. The second LOC accession number, 1907.36, referred to their blueprint. These tunnels were massive, subterranean arteries used for moving mail and freight underneath the station, but they had been decommissioned decades ago, sealed off, and mostly forgotten. Elias needed to find the date they first fell silent. He dove into digital archives of the Washington Post and the National Railway Historical Society. He filtered for Union Station, freight, and closure. The official closure date was 1986, but Dr. Vance was killed in 1958. Elias needed a date of a first silence, an earlier temporary one. He found it in a digitized microfilm of a small local railway journal, the Great Mail Hall Halt of 1963. In 1963, a major labor strike by the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way employees had crippled rail freight for 2 full months. The Union Station freight tunnels, which handled vast volumes of mail, were completely shut down and fell silent on August 15, 1963. The code was 08151963. The challenge was access. The tunnels were sealed by heavy, reinforced doors secured by the D.C. Metropolitan Transit Authority and heavily monitored by internal CCTV. He couldn't just use a saw. He needed a more sophisticated approach. He spent the next 2 days crafting a digital shadow. Elias's expertise in data went beyond retrieval. He was a master of infrastructure cloaking. He used a highly specialized software rig, a ghost key, to create a virtual bypass of the DCMTA's aging security system. He needed to make the CCTV camera covering the maintenance access point blink for 5 minutes and disable the magnetic lock on the service door. On the third night, Elias made his move. Dressed in nondescript black work clothes and carrying a toolkit disguised as a fiber optic inspection rig, he entered the maintenance sublevel of the station just after 2 a.m. The air in the sublevel was heavy with the smell of diesel, mold, and age. He located the sealed access point, a massive, riveted steel door with a small, circular viewing port. The camera above it was mounted high. He placed his ghost key device, a small, innocuous-looking metal box, against the wall. A silent countdown began on his watch. 00:04:59. The green light on the door's magnetic lock immediately turned red,
indicating a system fault. The camera image on Elias's internal monitor went blank, replaced by a 5-minute loop of an empty corridor taken 20 minutes earlier. The door clicked open. He slipped inside. The tunnels were a masterpiece of industrial decay. Water constantly dripped from the ceiling, echoing loudly in the vast, subterranean space, giving the impression that the trains were indeed weeping. The air was cold, damp, and perfectly still. Elias followed the old, rusted tracks deep into the darkness, navigating by the occasional emergency glow strip and his own high-powered tactical flashlight. He was looking for a marker, a symbol, or anything that Dr. Vance would have recognized as his own. After a tense 15 minutes, he found it. Set into the concrete wall of a long, disused maintenance alcove was a small brass plaque. Unlike the official DC plaques, this one was stamped with a single, unique, and deeply personal symbol, the caduceus, the staff of Hermes, crossed with an astronomical compass, the architect's personal sigil. The plaque was a false front. Elias pressed the center of the caduceus. The brass plate slid back, revealing a small recessed safe. It was secured by a cipher lock identical to the one in Wyoming. The code was the date of silence, 0815-1963. He keyed it in, 0815-1963. Click. The safe opened. This time, the container was a tightly rolled magnetic tape reel, a state-of-the-art storage medium for 1958. Elias rushed to his portable reader. The data was a single, immense file, the blueprint and personnel register for the Council of Seven.
The document was staggering. It listed the 7 men and 1 woman who comprised the shadow government. 2 senators, the head of a major oil conglomerate, a retired CIA director, a prominent theologian, a Supreme Court justice, and a high-ranking military official. The list detailed their current positions, their aliases, and their connections to Project Malleus. They weren't merely hiding a project. They were using the threat of environmental catastrophe to manipulate global markets and political elections. The architect had managed to identify every single one of them. Elias took a deep, shaky breath. He had the names of the most powerful people in America, all of whom were complicit in his grandfather's murder and the exploitation of his research. The data reel also contained the key to the 3rd dead drop. It was a single encrypted line of text at the bottom of the register. The 3rd path is to the Father of Liberty. Seek the silent bell in the place where the Union was founded. Code is the exact moment the tide turned. The Father of Liberty pointed to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the birthplace of the nation. The silent bell was a clear reference to the Liberty Bell, and the place where the Union was founded was Independence Hall. The 3rd accession number, 1777.90, referred to a land receipt. The context of the 3rd location was becoming clear, a historical marker in Philadelphia tied to the Revolutionary War. Elias secured the tape reel, slid the brass plaque back into place, and sealed the access door. The camera blinked back to life. The magnetic lock snapped shut. The virtual 5-minute loop was erased. He was in and out in less than an hour, the tunnel's weeping echoes fading behind him. He had 2/3 of the conspiracy's core data, and the final puzzle piece of the first sequence was in Philadelphia, waiting at the site of the nation's founding, protected by a code that would recall the turning point of the revolution. Elias landed in Philadelphia and immediately felt the weight of history. The city was a monument to the very ideals his grandfather's murderers were undermining. He headed straight to the Independence Hall area. The 1777.90 LOC accession referred to the land receipt by the surveyor John Vance, a document from the Revolutionary era. The third dead drop had to be related to that period. He focused on the final clue. Code is the exact moment the tide turned. In the context of 1777, the tide-turning moment was the Battle of Saratoga, the decisive American victory that secured French support and ensured the eventual success of the Revolution. The battle ended on October 17, 1777. But the clue said the exact moment. The battle was long. Elias needed a specific time. He delved into military history archives, specifically personal journals and dispatches from the Battle of Saratoga. He found a document, a field journal belonging to General Horatio Gates, where the general had scrawled a note about the official end of the British surrender negotiations. The journal entry read, "Final signing of the Articles of Convention completed this day under the most brilliant sun at 10:45 a.m." The code was 1017-1777-1045. A 12-digit code referencing the full date and time. The location, Seek the Silent Bell. Elias walked the grounds around the Liberty Bell. It was displayed prominently in the pavilion, silent, cracked, and iconic. But the original clue mentioned a silent bell in the place where the Union was founded, the old bell tower of Independence Hall itself. He went to the old courtyard. The tower was locked down, but a small, unassuming Revolutionary War-era cannon sat on display in the garden, a historical marker largely ignored by tourists. He ran his high-frequency scanner over the cannon. The metal was dense, old, and full of historical artifacts, but a reading from the cannon's muzzle showed a small, highly dense metal capsule embedded in the ancient brass. The architect had cleverly hidden the third piece of data inside an artifact of American defense, a silent weapon overlooking the birthplace of liberty. Elias returned late that night, dressed as a maintenance worker for a major utility company. A high-visibility vest and a hard hat were his best cloaks. He used a precise, low-impact sonic chisel to vibrate the capsule loose from the brass of the cannon's muzzle. It took 20 tense minutes, but the capsule, a small polished brass cylinder, popped out cleanly. The final cipher lock, 1017-1777-1045. The cylinder opened to reveal a small, tightly wound paper scroll. This was the analog data Dr. Vance had mentioned. It was the original final manuscript he wrote before fleeing the Nevada bunker. The manuscript detailed the 7 fragments of the project and their purpose: to create an irrefutable chain of evidence that would lead to the prosecution of the Council of Seven. But the most crucial information was the revelation of the final 4 coordinates. Fragment 4, the power. The code is the year the South went dark. The location is a decommissioned power plant in Tennessee, near the Appalachian Trail. Fragment 5, the creed. The code is the exact word count of the Second Amendment. The location is a Masonic temple in Boston, Massachusetts. Fragment 6, the wealth. The code is the decimal value of the Dow's Great Crash on Black Tuesday. The location is a private vault beneath the Federal Reserve Bank in New York City. Fragment 7, the messenger. The final piece is not data. It is the location of Dr. Vance's final resting place, the only proof of his fate. The location is an unmarked grave in a national cemetery in San Francisco, California. The code is the total number of U.S. presidents who have died in office. The first sequence was complete. Elias had confirmed the conspiracy, identified the council, and now had the blueprint for the remaining 4 pieces of the puzzle. He also found a final, heart-wrenching message scrawled on the paper scroll, distinct from the codes.
My son, if you have found this, you are the messenger. You must finish this work. But know this, I didn't just hide evidence. I hid the counter-program within the fragments. The Council must be stopped, but my work, Project Malleus, must also be neutralized. The storm is coming, messenger. Find the final piece, or the weapon will fall into the wrong hands forever. Elias Vance, the information archaeologist, now understood his destiny. The quest for truth was not just for the memory of his grandfather, Dr. Jonathan Vance, but for the future of the American climate and political stability. He had the next clue, pointing him to the Appalachian Mountains of Tennessee, and a deep-seated secret tied to the nation's energy infrastructure. The journey was far from over. It was only getting deadlier. Elias Vance drove south, leaving the historical monuments of Philadelphia behind for the rugged isolation of Tennessee's Appalachian foothills. The fourth dead drop was located at a decommissioned power plant tied to the code "Year the South Went Dark." Elias suspected this referred to a major power grid failure, a significant blackout that would be memorable yet historically obscure enough to serve as a secure cipher. He began his research while driving, using his vehicle's sophisticated satellite link to dive into electrical engineering archives and regional history. He searched for major power outages in the southern United States between 1950 and 1980. The most famous was the Northeast blackout of 1965, but that didn't fit the geographic clue. He finally hit a small regional news archive from the Tennessee Valley Authority. In the late 1960s, a perfect storm of environmental factors, a record drought lowering reservoir levels, combined with a severe coal shortage, led to a cascading failure across the TVA grid. This was compounded by a catastrophic substation fire in Knoxville. The outage was not a single moment, but a period of rolling blackouts and mandatory industrial shutdowns that crippled the region's manufacturing output. The peak, the moment the financial and industrial South truly went dark, was documented in a confidential TVA report Elias managed to hack, the 1969 winter power crisis. The key date was the day the TVA declared a state of emergency, mandating the most severe power cuts, December 1, 1969. The code was 12011969. The location was a defunct power plant deep in the mountains, precisely at the coordinates supplied by the numerical value 1814.15, the original LOC map number, now confirmed to refer to the 41st parallel's historical context, not the latitude itself. Overlaid with the highest density of the 1969 crisis zone. He found the coordinates, an abandoned hydroelectric dam and coal-fired station on the banks of the Hiwassee River. The power plant was a fortress of rust and overgrown kudzu, a monument to the industrial past. Elias surveyed the site from a small drone, noting the surveillance cameras were non-functional, but the perimeter fence was formidable. He bypassed the fence near the riverbank, using a narrow, dried-up drainage culvert that ran beneath the concrete foundations. Inside, the plant was a labyrinth of echoing turbine halls and darkened control rooms. He located the old main switching station, the massive console where the TVA operator would have enacted the shutdown orders in 1969. Behind the console was a heavy, blast-proof door, with the insignia of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers stamped on it. This wasn't a normal power plant feature. He ran his scanner. Hidden behind the door was a small, sealed utility room, and inside, the telltale signal of a shielded container. The lock was another cipher panel. He entered the code, 12011969. Click. The door slid open, revealing a tiny, sterile room. Inside, bolted to a steel table, was a sophisticated, hermetically sealed container. The container held the fourth fragment, a collection of classified satellite imagery and meteorological data from 1959 to 1969. The data wasn't just proof of Project Malleus, the weather control program. It was proof of its unintended consequences. Dr. Vance's research, designed to create localized microstorms, had been used recklessly by the Council of Seven, resulting in far-reaching chaotic shifts in the eastern seaboard's climate, including, Elias realized with a jolt of horror, contributing directly to the very drought and power crisis that provided the code. Project Malleus wasn't just about storms, it was about climate destabilization. The ultimate goal of the Council of Seven was to control resources, water, agriculture, and power by introducing controlled chaos. The Council of Seven wasn't just a political cabal, they were environmental terrorists. The satellite images, when processed, showed clear, unnatural patterns in cloud formations over the Gulf of Mexico, deliberately steered by atmospheric ionization efforts. They weren't just creating microstorms, they were redirecting weather systems. The fourth fragment also contained the key to the fifth dead drop, a cryptic couplet in the margin of a meteorological map. Where the first light of freedom shone, find the words count. The architect's key hides in the stone of the first craft. The first light of freedom was Boston, Massachusetts. The words count pointed to the Second Amendment clue. The first craft referred to the Masons and their founding architecture. The destination was confirmed, a Masonic temple in Boston. Elias sealed the container, leaving the power plant exactly as he found it. The shadows of the Appalachian Mountains seemed to grow colder as he realized the true scale of the conspiracy. He wasn't just exposing a past crime. He was exposing the ongoing mechanism of climate manipulation that was still shaping the modern world. Elias flew commercially to Boston, shedding his rural demeanor for the crisp anonymity of a finance professional. The fifth target was a Masonic temple, a place rooted in deep secrecy and tradition, a perfect hiding spot for the architect. The code was the exact word count of the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Elias ran a quick search. The official, ratified text, including the preamble, reads, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." The count, 31 words. The code was 0000031. Elias standardized all codes to 10 digits for the lock. The location? The largest and oldest active Masonic temple in Boston, a grand granite structure near the Common. Gaining access to a secure private temple was his most challenging task yet. He couldn't hack his way in. He needed a social path. He spent a day studying the temple's public records, noting the annual Founders' Day Gala, a black-tie event for major contributors and local dignitaries. This was his window. Elias fabricated a persona, Dr. Aaron Caldwell, a wealthy philanthropist and historian from the University of Virginia, claiming a specific, deep interest in the temple's Revolutionary War-era archives, a connection to John Vance's LOC accession document. Using his contacts from the anonymous Swiss trust, who clearly possessed massive resources, Elias secured a verifiable but discreet last-minute ticket to the gala. He even managed to get a brief private audience with the Grand Master under the guise of discussing a potential large donation. The night of the gala, Elias, impeccably dressed, moved through the ornate halls, his focus razor-sharp. He located the archives room on the 3rd floor, a hollowed space filled with centuries of documents and artifacts. The Grand Master had mentioned that the archives were protected by a century-old, low-tech security system of interlocking copper wires and pressure plates, easily defeatable but noticeable if triggered. During a long-winded toast, Elias slipped away. Using a custom-built electromagnetic dampener, he temporarily neutralized the low-voltage security field around the archive's door and silently picked the historical pin tumbler lock. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of leather and age. He went directly to the central pedestal, which held a large first-edition Bible, the Great Book of Constitutions. He ran his scanner over the stone pedestal. The signal was weak, but definitely there, a small concealed compartment in the base. The lock was built into the bronze base plate, disguised as a decorative crest. He keyed in the code, 000-00031. Click. The compartment slid open. The fifth fragment was a small gold-plated digital storage device, a microchip, a technology far ahead of 1958. The data on the chip was devastating. The complete financial ledger of the Council of Seven from 1958 to the present day. This fragment detailed the monetization of Project Malleus, how the Council used insider information on weather patterns to manipulate commodity futures, insurance markets, and political stability, generating a secret multi-trillion-dollar war chest, the wealth of a shadow empire. Elias saw names he recognized from American public life, captains of industry, politicians, media moguls, all tied to the blood money generated by climate chaos. The ledger included a final, chilling appendix, the location and code for the sixth dead drop. It wasn't a poem or a note, but a cryptocurrency wallet address written in a 1950s cipher. This confirmed the architect had anticipated the ultimate evolution of global finance. The wallet address translated, using a complex cipher Elias recognized as a version of the Enigma code, to a physical location, a sub-basement vault in the New York Federal Reserve Building. The code was the decimal value of the Dow's Great Crash on Black Tuesday. This pointed to the 1929 stock market crash, the ultimate symbol of financial destruction. Elias quickly transferred the financial ledger, replaced the microchip, resealed the compartment, and reversed his entry. He was back in the ballroom just as the Grand Master was finishing his toast, his presence unnoticed, carrying the wealth and the sins of the American elite on a single laptop. The next stop was the financial heart of the world, New York City, to confront the heart of the Council's wealth. New York City was a jarring shift from the stillness of the Appalachian woods and the hushed tradition of Boston. The sixth location, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York in Lower Manhattan, was the most heavily guarded civilian building in the country. The code was tied to financial ruin, the decimal value of the Dow's Great Crash on Black Tuesday. Elias needed a very specific number. The crash on October 29, 1929, was a percentage drop. On that day, the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 11.7%. However, Elias realized the architect wouldn't have used a percentage. He needed a raw, non-rounded decimal value tied to the initial collapse. He hacked into a digitized 1930 report from the Bank for International Settlements, which had been tracking the raw, minute-by-minute index drop. The report contained the exact fractional decline in points from the start of trading to the final bell on Black Tuesday. The unrounded figure was 38.33 points. The architect's specific figure was the first 5 decimal places of the calculated initial drop rate, a number only visible in these highly specific closed reports, 0.3839. The 38 points of the 11.7% drop
expressed as a decimal value of the full index. The code was 0003839. Accessing the vault beneath the Federal Reserve was an impossibility. It housed 1/4 of the world's gold and was secured by multiple layers of military-grade security. Elias had to find a secondary forgotten route. The LOC accession number 1907.36 referred to the DC freight tunnels. Elias realized the key was subterranean infrastructure. He researched the NYC subway system and its connections to surrounding city infrastructure. He discovered a largely forgotten network of pneumatic delivery tubes and maintenance tunnels built in the early 20th century, which often crossed beneath the bedrock of key financial buildings. One specific tunnel, used for delivering financial documents via vacuum tubes, ran directly beneath the Fed's sub-basement vault. The tunnel had been sealed in the 1970s and was only listed in the city's historic infrastructure register, the perfect blind spot. Elias accessed the tunnel from a maintenance grate in a neighboring building's boiler room 2 blocks away. The journey through the crumbling, tight, iron-lined tube was agonizing. A 3-hour crawl through dusty, claustrophobic darkness. He finally reached the point directly beneath the Fed vault. The bedrock was several feet thick, but Dr. Vance had created a permanent fixture. Embedded in the cement was a small reinforced inspection port, disguised as a pipe flange. It had a cipher lock, identical to the others. He keyed in the code, 0003839. Click. The flange unscrewed, revealing a capsule large enough for a laptop. The 6th fragment was not a single object, but a complex multi-component storage array, a 1950s electronic device wrapped around a modern encrypted solid-state drive. This was the Compter program.
The SSD contained a sophisticated, self-executing software package designed to neutralize Project Malleus. It was a decommissioning code and tracking algorithm that could locate and shut down the few remaining Malleus ionization stations hidden globally, effectively stopping the Council's ability to manipulate the weather. The digital file was protected by one final layer of encryption, a passphrase. Elias scrolled to the final appendix of the physical components, the key to the 7th and final dead drop, and the passphrase. The location, the unmarked grave in the National Cemetery in San Francisco, California. The key would be the cryptic identifier on Dr. Vance's military tombstone. The passphrase, the answer to the code for the 7th drop, the total number of U.S. presidents who have died in office. The 7th and final piece was the emotional core of the mission, finding his grandfather and gaining the final passphrase to stop the climate weapon. Elias replaced the flange, sealed the tunnel access behind him, and emerged into the neon-lit chaos of Manhattan. He had the weapon to stop Project Malleus in his hands. Now he needed the final piece of the code to activate it. The journey to the West Coast was his final, most personal move. Elias flew into San Francisco, the final destination on his grandfather's half-century-old map. The target was an unmarked grave in a national cemetery, and the final code was the total number of U.S. presidents who have died in office. Elias performed the simple final count. 4 presidents died of natural causes in office: Harrison, Taylor, Harding, and Roosevelt. And 4 were assassinated: Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and Kennedy. Total, 8 presidents. The passphrase and code were 000000008. Elias drove to the massive, sprawling San Francisco National Cemetery at the Presidio, a beautiful, solemn area overlooking the Golden Gate.
Elias checked the cemetery's digital and paper records. They contained no entry for a Dr. Jonathan Vance. As the architect intended, he had been scrubbed. But the paper scroll from Philadelphia gave him one final clue. Dr. Vance would be buried under the name of his closest friend, an Army colonel named Arthur J. Hayes, who had been declared missing in action during the Korean War, but whose body was never recovered.
The moment Princess Neferet realized the sun was a lie, it was a perfectly ordinary, scorching afternoon. She was 19, draped in linen as white as fresh plaster, and attending the annual feast of the Sed with her father, the divine pharaoh Amenhotep IX. The air in the temple of Amun-Ra was thick with the smoke of frankincense and the rhythmic, hypnotic chant of the priests, a sound meant to reassure the populace that all was right with the two lands. Neferet, the pharaoh's eldest daughter, and a student of the royal archives, a scandalous curiosity for a woman, was perched on a gilded throne, feigning the regal serenity expected of her. Her father had just made the symbolic run, proving his continued vigor and right to rule, and the crowd outside the temple walls roared its approval. But the familiar ritual felt hollow. For months, a tiny, venomous thought had been growing in the quiet, dusty corners of her mind, sparked by an inconsistency she'd found while translating an obscure Sumerian tablet in the royal library, a text her tutor had conveniently dismissed as foreign heresy. The thought was this: what if the gods were not divine? It was a question punishable by death, not just for the heretic, but for their whole family. Yet it pulsed within her like a hidden heart. All of Egypt's stability, its law, its very identity, rested on the absolute, unquestionable divinity of the pharaoh, who was the physical son of Ra. To question this was to unravel the fabric of reality itself. As the high priest Mentuemhat began the grand benediction, "May the sun god Ra, father of the pharaoh, continue to bless us," Neferet's gaze snagged on the massive 7-foot-tall granite obelisk that stood at the temple's center. It was perfectly aligned to catch the midday sun, its pyramidion, capped with electrum, meant to blaze with celestial light, symbolizing Ra's descending power. Today, however, a barely perceptible shimmering of something metallic and unnatural seemed to vibrate around the capstone. It wasn't the sun's natural reflection. It was something engineered, something cold. She excused herself from the ceremony, a fluttering fan held to her face, claiming a touch of the heat. Her mind raced with the heresy she had nurtured. The Sumerian text described a sky metal that could store the sun's energy, a technology lost to a prehistoric cataclysm. Could it be that this obelisk, and perhaps others like it across Egypt, were not merely religious symbols, but power conduits, devices used to create illusions of divine favor? That night, under a star-dusted sky that felt suddenly vast and terrifying, Neferet broke protocol. She slipped out of the royal residence in Memphis, dressed in the plain robes of a temple scribe, a knife hidden in her sash. Her destination was the family's secret Ka chamber beneath the residence, a sanctuary supposedly reserved for the pharaoh's spirit. The air in the subterranean passage was heavy with the scent of dried natron and ancient dust. She lit a single oil lamp, its light throwing long, dancing shadows of the jackal-headed god Anubis on the walls. She knew the layout from scrolls that were never meant for her eyes, scrolls that detailed not just funerary rites, but the architectural keys to the royal compounds, knowledge intended only for the ruling pharaoh and his most trusted vizier. She reached the massive sealed door to the Ka chamber. Its locking mechanism was not a simple bolt, but a complex series of interconnected star chart tumblers,
a lock that required more than brute force. It required a specific astronomical alignment. She worked quickly, her heart thudding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, aligning the canopy stars on the dial to the configuration she had memorized from the heretical Sumerian tablet. Click. The stone door, weighing several tons, groaned and slid inward, revealing not a sanctuary of the soul, but a chamber that seemed to belong to another world entirely. It was a room of gleaming basalt and unfamiliar polished metals. It was lit not by oil lamps or daylight, but by an unnatural cold blue light emanating from tall, cylindrical pillars. And in the center of the room, on a dais, sat a massive ornate chest of polished cedar, bound in heavy dark iron. As Neferet cautiously approached the chest, she felt a profound dread, not the fear of discovery, but the existential terror of a truth too large to comprehend. She put her trembling hands on the iron clasp and wrestled it open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded papyrus scrolls, was not a funerary urn or a golden statue of a god, but two horrifying objects. The first was a scepter, not the one her father carried in public, which was gold and jade, but one made of that same strange blue-glowing metal, humming faintly. It was a tool, a remote control perhaps, for the engineering that powered the obelisks. The other object, the dark secret, was a small, dried, and utterly mundane piece of black wood resting on a scroll bearing her father's own meticulous royal seal. Neferet carefully unrolled the accompanying papyrus. The script was her father's private hand, a spidery, precise hieroglyphic diary entry. Her eyes scanned the text, and with every line, the foundation of her world crumbled into dust. The entry was dated 20 years prior, just after his ascension to the throne, and it detailed a chilling confession. The old stories are true. The said festival must be maintained. The deception must be absolute. The sky metal power we inherited from the first people ensures the stability of the Nile, yes, but it does more. It allows us to speak for the entity, the thing in the deep tomb, the true power of Kemet. It is not Ra, it is not Osiris. It is a creature that sleeps beneath the desert sands, and it demands its tribute. A sacrifice, not of an animal, but of a soul, every 20 years to ensure the next 2 decades of Pharaoh's rule. The gods are merely the names we give to a necessary, terrifying bargain. Tonight I performed the ritual. The black wood of the sacrifice is secured. May my son never have to know this burden. May the deception hold. A single frozen tear slipped down Neferet's cheek. The sacrifice, every 20 years. She had turned 19 a few months ago. Her younger brother, Prince Khafre, the heir apparent, would turn 20 next year. The gods were a lie. The pharaoh's divinity was a lie, and her family's absolute rule was maintained by a recurring, blood-soaked bargain with an ancient dark force. Neferet clutched the scepter and the scroll. The cool metal of the former contrasted with the brittle fragility of the latter. She was no longer just a princess, but the keeper of a truth that could tear Egypt apart. The choice was not merely of succession, but of salvation or revolution. She knew, with chilling certainty, that her father, for all his love, would kill her to keep this secret safe. She was now a heretic, a conspirator, and the only person standing between her brother's innocent life and the pharaoh's ultimate, horrifying secret. To defeat this ancient bargain, she would have to turn the very tools of the gods against the divine ruler.
The Scepter and the Scholars. Neferet spent the remainder of the night in the royal archives, a sprawling subterranean complex beneath the main palace. It was the only place vast and silent enough to contemplate the magnitude of her discovery. The black wood, a piece of ordinary petrified acacia, now terrifyingly significant, was wrapped in linen and tucked deep within her robes. The scepter of blue glowing unknown metal rested on a worn table, humming a low, almost imperceptible frequency that seemed to vibrate in her very bones. Her father's diary had provided the motive, the appeasement of the entity, and the time frame, less than a year before Prince Khafre's fatal 20th birthday. Now Neferet needed the mechanism. How did her family maintain this elaborate facade? How was the sky metal power controlled, and what exactly was its function beyond creating a dazzling light show? She realized the answer wasn't in the sacred texts, but in the most mundane, overlooked architectural blueprints. She unrolled the massive brittle scrolls detailing the layout of the Nile Valley power grid, a phrase never used, of course, but that's what it was. The obelisks, the temples, the Great Pyramids. The official story held that the pyramids were tombs for the Old Kingdom pharaohs, but Neferet's father's scribbled annotations, hidden in the margin of a plan for the Giza necropolis, told a different tale. He had sketched a schematic showing the 3 major pyramids aligned not to the stars of Orion's belt, the common belief, but to 3 submerged deep-water vents in the bedrock below. "They are resonators," she whispered, her voice husky in the silent chamber. "They pulled the Earth's energy, and the obelisks broadcast it." But broadcast what? Divine blessing, or something more insidious? She carefully examined the scepter. It was sleek, without obvious buttons or levers, yet its surface shimmered with complex, glowing patterns. To understand it, she needed help, someone whose loyalty was not to the pharaoh, but to truth. Her mind immediately went to Chaim Masset, the eccentric royal astronomer. He was considered a harmless fool by the court, often more interested in charting the wandering stars than in court politics. He was also the only scholar who had openly, albeit quietly, questioned the mathematical purity of the temple alignments, the astronomer and the heresy. Neferet found Chaim Masset in his usual post, the highest terrace of the residence, surrounded by armillary spheres and stacks of mud bricks covered in astronomical calculations. The moment she showed him the scepter, his usual nervous twitch disappeared, replaced by an expression of profound, terrified recognition. "By Thoth, princess, where did you find this?" he gasped, his fingers tracing the humming metal. "It is a key, Chaim Masset," I replied, keeping my voice low. "A key to a kingdom built on a lie. Tell me what it is, and I warn you, if you tell anyone, you will not only be executed, but the truth will die with you, and my brother will be sacrificed." The mention of the royal sacrifice, a secret he should not have known, made his eyes widen further. "The pharaoh? He told you the truth of the said ritual?" "He wrote it down. It seems my family's divine right is actually a protection racket for the entity. I need to know how this scepter works and how it relates to the pyramids." Chaim Masset calmed himself, taking a deep, ragged breath. "Princess, the pyramids are not tombs. They are amplifiers. We were taught that the first people, the ones who truly knew the science of Kemet, built them. They harness the Earth's natural seismic energy and focus it, like a lens focuses light." He pointed to the scepter. "This is a harmonic tuner. It doesn't create energy, it directs it. We've always known that certain specific frequencies could affect human perception, but no one dared to explore it." Neferet felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. "You mean to say the blessing we feel during the said festival, the sense of absolute, divine rightness, is fabricated?"
Yes, Kayamwaset confirmed, his voice barely a whisper. The obelisks don't just broadcast sunlight. They broadcast a specific sonic frequency that induces a state of absolute, unquestioning loyalty in the populace. The pharaoh's divinity is a state of induced mass hypnosis, amplified through the pyramids and broadcast by the electrum-capped obelisks. It is the perfect, engineered tyranny. This explained the political inertia, the absolute lack of rebellion despite famines and heavy taxation. Egypt wasn't ruled by love or fear, but by a subtle, ongoing sonic conditioning. The looming threat. Their clandestine meeting was interrupted by a shadow falling over the terrace. Vizier Eri, the pharaoh's chief minister and the undisputed second most powerful man in Egypt, stood at the doorway. Eri was a man whose smile never reached his eyes, a man who had served his family for 40 years and knew every secret passage and protocol. Princess Neferet. Eri's voice was smooth as polished alabaster. The pharaoh requests your presence immediately. He says he misses your wise counsel. The phrasing was subtly wrong. The pharaoh never requested, he commanded. And he never expressed vulnerability like missing counsel. This was a test. Had he discovered the missing scepter? Neferet quickly slipped the scepter into Kayamwaset's wide sleeve, giving him a look that promised instant death if he failed to keep it safe. Of course, Vizier Eri, Neferet said, adopting the practiced serene smile of a princess. But before I leave, tell me, Vizier, you're familiar with the black wood of acacia, the sacred piece in the Ka chamber. Eri's eyes flickered, barely noticeable, but enough. It is a potent ward against evil, princess, very old. Indeed. I only ask because I recall seeing your personal seal among the documents of the Ka chamber. It must be a tremendous honor to be so trusted with the royal secrets. Eri had struck a nerve. He knew the truth of the sacrifice, and he was clearly complicit. He gave her a long, calculating look, a look that assessed her not as a princess, but as an opponent. The pharaoh's trust is the only true honor in Kemet, princess, Eri replied, his smile now chillingly real. Perhaps you should hurry. Your father is impatient. The pharaoh's chamber. In the great hall of the residence, Pharaoh Amenhotep IX sat on his throne, his face weary, but his eyes sharp. The sheer weight of the lie seemed to have aged him 20 years overnight. Neferet, he said, dismissing the guards with a wave of his hand. Come close, my daughter. The weight of this crown is heavy. I need to know your heart. My heart belongs to Kemet, father, and to the divine line that rules it, she recited flawlessly. Do not lie to me, Neferet. I was searching for the said ritual key, the scepter, to begin preparations for next year's renewal. It is gone. He didn't ask if she took it. He stated it. I found a text, father, an old Sumerian heresy. It spoke of a device, a metal rod that controls the alignment of the stars. I was studying it. The lie has protected us for millennia. Amenhotep's voice was harsh, but tinged with genuine fear. The cost of the entity's sleep is one life every 20 years. The cost of its waking is all of Egypt, fire, plague, and the swallowing of the Nile. You have no idea of the power you have disturbed.
He rose, his regal mask finally slipping. I love Khafre. He is my son. But I am Pharaoh. I must choose between my son and my civilization. It is the same choice every pharaoh has made since the first dynasty. Give me the scepter. Let me perform the duty. No, father. Neferet stood her ground, her knees shaking. The lie has made us slaves to a demon. We are not divine rulers. We are high priests serving a dark master. I will find a way to break the bargain. I will find a way to defeat the entity without waking it. The pharaoh looked at her with a mix of fury and despair.
You are not a priest, Neferet. You are a scientist. You believe you can engineer your way out of a curse. You will doom us all. You are now a traitor to Kemet and a betrayer of the gods." He called for the guards. "Vizier Iri, confine the princess to her chambers. She is not to leave. Find the scepter and prepare the documents. Princess Neferet is to be removed from the line of succession and placed under the supervision of the temple priests forever." Neferet had lost the throne, but she had bought time. Confined, she was now isolated, but safe from immediate execution. Her father had chosen to punish her politically, not lethally, yet. He hadn't yet given up hope that she would yield. But outside the chamber, Vizier Iri gave the guards a look that was not the pharaoh's. It was a look that promised a quick, final, and unauthorized end to the pharaoh's rebellious daughter. Neferet is now a prisoner. The scepter is hidden, and the vizier is revealed as a knowing accomplice with his own agenda. How will she escape her confinement and begin the research that will allow her to master the sky metal technology and battle both her father and the entity before the year is out? Neferet's confinement was less a dungeon and more a gilded cage. She was locked within the high walls of her own suite, a lavish set of rooms overlooking the inner courtyard, but the door was guarded by 4 of the pharaoh's most loyal Medjai, Nubian archers known for their ruthless efficiency and unshakable discipline. They were not easily bribed or misled. Her father, the pharaoh, had acted with speed born of desperation. In less than an hour, the royal decree was circulated. Princess Neferet, suffering from a divine affliction, was to undertake a period of strict seclusion and prayer, and her public duties were suspended indefinitely. The lie, as always, was polished and seamless. Neferet knew the danger wasn't the lock on the door, it was the silence within the palace. Every chamber in the royal residence, from the throne room to the kitchen, was built with an ingenious system of ventilation shafts designed for cooling, but which also carried sound with chilling clarity. And Vizier Iri was an expert listener. She couldn't speak to anyone. She couldn't write letters that the guards would inevitably intercept, and she couldn't risk Kamwasit being seen anywhere near her quarters. She was cut off from the very research she needed to save her brother. But Neferet had spent years studying the palace's hidden architecture, the real architecture. She knew the residence was not just a home, but a gigantic, living archive of the pharaoh's power. The architect's secret. Neferet spent the first 2 days feigning illness, refusing all but the most basic food and water. This allowed her to observe the guards' routine and, more importantly, to study the walls. In the corner of her antechamber, hidden behind a tall gold-inlaid wardrobe, was a section of wall made of sandstone, not the polished limestone of the rest of the room. This was not a mistake, it was a relic. She recalled reading an obscure tablet detailing the original structure of the first residence, a building older than the current palace, constructed by a shadowy pre-dynastic pharaoh known only as Jedefra, who was supposedly erased from history for being a technocrat rather than a god. Using the sharp point of a discarded bronze hairpin, Neferet painstakingly chipped away at the mortar around one of the sandstone blocks. It was slow, agonizing work, requiring absolute silence. The rhythmic scrape and tap were masked by the distant sounds of the court, a military band practicing, the hum of palace activity. Finally, just before dawn on the 3rd day, the block loosened. She slid it out, revealing a small, dry, dusty alcove and a narrow, vertical shaft leading straight down. It was the original scribe's escape hatch, a relic of Djefra's paranoid design, meant for the emergency extraction of sensitive documents. It was too small for a guard, but perfect for her slight frame. She wrote a brief, innocuous note apologizing for her seclusion to avoid immediate suspicion, and then, without a moment's hesitation, she slid into the darkness. The Under-Memphis Network. The shaft was a tight squeeze, descending 20 feet into the earth before opening into a labyrinth of dry, pre-dynastic tunnels. This was Under-Memphis, the forgotten subterranean city that predated the pharaohs, a place where the foundations of the current kingdom rested on the ruins of a far older, technologically advanced civilization. Neferet recognized the tunnel walls. They were lined not with rough-cut stone, but with incredibly smooth, fused black glass, a material she had read about in the suppressed texts, described as the skin of the earth dwellers, perfect for minimizing friction and dampening sound. Her knowledge of the palace blueprints became her map. She navigated the darkness for an hour, the faint scent of sulfur and ozone growing stronger the deeper she went, until she reached the section of the tunnel running beneath the temple of Ptah, the god of craftsmen and architecture. Here the black glass walls gave way to a massive, perfectly circular chamber carved out of the bedrock. In the center stood a structure unlike anything in the modern world, a giant, spinning, copper and iron gimbal. This was the source of the humming. This was the primary harmonic reactor for the Memphis region. It wasn't just a temple, it was a power plant. As Neferet watched, the massive gimbal spun, creating powerful electromagnetic pulses that radiated outwards, following the underground lines that fed the obelisks. The light was hypnotic, casting strobing shadows on the surrounding walls. Suddenly, a voice sliced through the humming silence. "You have a remarkable sense of direction, Princess." Vizier Eri stepped out of the shadows, flanked by two imposing men in the gray robes of the Set cult, a secretive sect dedicated to ancient destructive power. He hadn't been searching, he had been waiting. The Vizier's revelation. "You are not surprised to see me, Princess. Eri has served the throne for 40 years, yes, but I serve a far older, more persistent master than your father." "The entity?" she asked, her voice shaking despite her efforts. Eri laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "The entity is what your family calls it, a convenient myth. The truth, Neferet, is that the sacrifice is a transfer of life force. The pharaoh doesn't appease a god, he recharges the system. The power of Kemet, the stability, the fertile soil, the very peace of the two lands is not divine. It is stolen life force, harvested from a pristine, vibrant soul every 20 years. He pointed to the spinning gimbal. This reactor, and the others like it, run on a biological fuel. That is why the said ritual must be held. That is why the black wood must be stained. The blood sacrifice isn't a plea, it's a power source to keep the lights on and the mass hypnosis running." "And you are complicit in murder?"
"I am complicit in survival," Eri countered, taking a step closer. "Your father is weak. He hates the bargain. He hesitates. The current must flow, Princess. The system must be fed. And when Khafre is sacrificed and the pharaoh dies of a broken heart, I will be the one to ensure the power transfer continues. The system is the true pharaoh." He gestured to the two men in gray robes. "The Med-J guards are loyal to the pharaoh. These men are loyal to the enduring system. They will take you to a special place, Princess, a place where you can be studied, and your immense life force can be used to stabilize the reactor for the next century."
Eerie pulled a small silver whistle from his sash and blew a sharp metallic note. The two Set acolytes advanced, their eyes cold and empty. Neferet had been found out, trapped directly beneath the palace, and confronted with a far more terrifying truth. Her brother's death was not just a tribute, but a necessary act of energy maintenance for the entire kingdom. Her knowledge had delivered her straight into the heart of the system she sought to dismantle. Neferet's mind raced, not with fear, but with a surge of cold, analytical logic. Eerie's revelation had changed everything. The entity was not a creature, but a system powered by life force. The very stability of Kemet was built on a lie, fueled by generations of ritual murder. As the two Set acolytes advanced, their faces impassive, Neferet noticed something subtle. They weren't just men. Their movements were too precise, too synchronized, almost unnatural. Their eyes glowed with a faint blue light, identical to the scepter's hum. "They're conditioned, aren't they, Eerie?" Neferet said, stalling for time, her gaze fixed on the spinning gimbal. "Like the populace, but deeper. They're part of the system." Eerie smirked. "Indeed, the priests of Set guard the deeper truths. They are the living conduits, the loyalists who ensure the flow of power. And now you will join them, Princess, not as a conduit, but as the fuel." The acolytes lunged, their movements surprisingly fast for men in heavy robes. Neferet, despite her royal upbringing, had trained in the palace's less traditional disciplines, archery, and the quick, evasive movements she'd learned from the palace's Nubian guards. She ducked under the first acolyte's sweeping arm, narrowly avoiding a paralyzing blow to her neck. Her eyes darted around the chamber, the gimbal, the basalt walls, the smooth black glass tunnels leading away. It was all one colossal machine. And every machine had a weakness, a failsafe, or a way to be disrupted. "Where is Kayamwaset Eerie?" she shouted, hoping to catch him off guard. "He knows what this scepter does. He knows how to counter it." Eerie's eyes narrowed. "The fool is being convinced to reveal its location. But it doesn't matter. The scepter merely tunes the frequency. The gimbal itself is the heart. Once we drain your potent royal blood, Princess, the reactor will hum for 100 years, and your brother's sacrifice will be postponed." Postponed, not cancelled. The inherent depravity of the system solidified her resolve. As the second acolyte closed in, Neferet had a desperate thought. The scepter was a harmonic tuner, capable of directing energy and influencing perception. What if the gimbal itself could be overloaded by a resonant frequency? She scanned the chamber again, the blue light from the pillars, the hum of the gimbal, the vibration in the very air. It was all energy. She remembered a forgotten passage from a text about the first people that her father had deemed madness. To control the flow, one must resonate with the source. To break the flow, one must harmonize with the dissonance. The black wood of sacrifice. It was mundane, yes, but it was also a conductor of the life force, the very energy the system craved. What if it could be used not as a fuel, but as a disruptive medium? The engineer's gambit. Neferet had no time for precise calculations. It was pure instinct. As the first acolyte tackled her, she drove her knee into his stomach, surprising him with her ferocity. Before the second could react, she spun, pulling the rough petrified blackwood from her robes. She didn't know how, but she knew this wood had touched the sacrifice, had absorbed the essence of the life force that fueled the system. It was connected.
"You said the wood stains the sacrifice," Neferet yelled, holding the black wood aloft. "What if it can also reject it?" She took a deep breath, focusing all her will, all her fury, all her absolute refusal to let her brother die, and she plunged the sharp, jagged end of the blackwood into the closest glowing pillar. It wasn't a physical destruction she aimed for, but a harmonic disruption. The moment the wood touched the pillar, a deafening shriek erupted from the chamber. The blue light from the pillars intensified wildly, flickering with violent orange and purple hues. The spinning gimbal began to accelerate, vibrating so violently that the entire chamber shook. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The lights in the chamber flickered erratically, plunging the space into momentary darkness, then illuminating it with blinding pulses. "The system is overloading," Eerie screamed, his voice barely audible over the roar of the malfunctioning reactor. "You're going to collapse under Memphis." Neferet knew she had only moments. The disruption wouldn't last forever, and the explosion had given her an opening. The two set acolytes, disoriented and clutching their heads, were no longer focused on her. She pulled the black wood from the pillar, the glowing green fading, leaving the wood scorched but intact. The gimbal continued its violent shuddering, but the initial ear-splitting shriek had subsided to a grinding, mechanical groan.
"This is your end, Empheret," Neferet shouted over the din. "The Pharaoh's lie dies with you." She ran towards the collapsed conduit, dodging falling debris. The tunnel beyond was shrouded in thick, acrid smoke, but she knew it led directly to the deeper, less used passages that branched off towards the desert. Ifri, recovering from the initial shock, pulled a small, wicked-looking bronze dagger from his robes. "You will not leave here alive, princess. The system must endure." He lunged, not towards the main tunnel, but towards Neferet, his eyes blazing with fanaticism. He was desperate to silence her, to prevent the information from reaching anyone else, and perhaps to recapture the source of power that now pulsed erratically. Neferet, agile and desperate, sidestepped his lunge, feeling the cold kiss of the dagger as it grazed her arm. She spun, using her momentum to drive her elbow into Ifri's exposed temple. He reeled back, stunned. Before he could recover, Neferet sprinted into the smoke-filled tunnel, leaving the chaotic, sparking reactor chamber behind her. The sound of the gimbal's tortured groans slowly faded as she ran, replaced by the rhythmic thud of her own heart. She was no longer a prisoner, but a fugitive, marked for death by the very system her family had upheld for millennia. She had temporarily disrupted the main power source beneath Memphis, but she hadn't destroyed it, and without the scepter, she couldn't control it. She was alone, bleeding, and armed only with the knowledge of a horrific truth and a piece of burnt acacia wood. Her next step had to be to find Kayamwaset, reclaim the scepter, and find a way to dismantle the entire life-force-draining apparatus before Khafre's 20th birthday. The desert lay ahead, vast and unforgiving, but for Neferet, it offered a chance for freedom and a chance to truly fight for the soul of Egypt. Neferet burst out of the subterranean network an hour before dawn, emerging through a narrow, overgrown well shaft several miles outside the walls of Memphis. She was scratched, bruised, and covered in the dust and soot of the collapsing reactor chamber. The air, though cold, felt liberating, a stark contrast to the stifling, pressurized atmosphere beneath the palace. She was now a mescanet, a fugitive, a heretic, a ghost. She knew the palace guards and Ifri's set cultists would be scouring the roads and gates.
Her only advantage was that they would assume she was seeking shelter in a city, not venturing into the desolate plains. Her first priority was Kayamwaset and the scepter. The Royal Astronomer's House was a small, cluttered observatory located on the outskirts of the sprawling city near the necropolis. It was a place viewed with superstitious dread by the common people, making it an ideal, overlooked location for a meeting. But approaching it directly was suicide. Neferet used her knowledge of the common people's routes, moving through the narrow, unlit paths reserved for farmers bringing produce to the city before sunrise. She disguised herself by wrapping her linen robes tightly, covering her hair and the telltale royal bracelets with rough scarves she'd discarded from a market stall. As she drew closer to Kayamwaset's observatory, the silence was alarming. There should have been the glow of his lamps, the frantic energy of a man facing the gallows. Instead, the small mud brick structure was dark, its heavy wooden door slightly ajar. Neferet slipped inside. The room was in chaos. Astronomical instruments, brass astrolabes, papyrus charts, and water clocks were smashed. Tables were overturned. It was not the neat, efficient destruction of royal guards, but the frenzied violence of the Set cultists. Kayamwaset was gone. On the smashed table, Neferet found a message etched not with ink, but with a small, specialized brass stylus used for star charts, a stylus only Kayamwaset possessed. The message was a quick, sharp hieroglyphic symbol, the image of the god Thoth, knowledge, enclosed within a cartouche, protection, with a single crude sketch of a scorpion underneath. The message was clear. He was taken by Ifri's men, but he hid the scepter with the temple of Thoth. The scorpion, that was the key. The temple of Thoth at Abydos housed a shadowy ancient order of scribes known as the Guardians of the Stellar Archives, a group rumored to have records so old they predated the pharaohs. They used the scorpion symbol to denote the constellation of Jedefra's secret, the lost knowledge of the first technocrat pharaoh. Kayamwaset hadn't hidden the scepter in the main temple. He had hidden it with the secretive sect of scholars who revered the true history of Kemet. An unlikely ally. Neferet had to travel 300 miles north to Abydos, a dangerous multi-day journey for a fugitive. She needed currency, transport, and a way to signal the Guardians. She couldn't risk the main road, the Nile, or even the familiar caravan routes. She needed to take the desert road, the ancient, unforgiving path known only to a few nomadic traders. Her mind settled on one name, Akar, the head groom of the royal stables. Akar was a massive man, an ethnic Libyan who had been captured as a boy, but had earned his freedom through decades of loyal, silent service. He was an outsider, bound by duty, but not by faith in the divine pharaoh. Neferet had spent years with Akar, learning the difference between true horsemanship and court pretense. They shared a quiet mutual respect, bonded by their outsider status in the gilded hierarchy. She found Akar in the pre-dawn darkness, mending harness in the stable yard. He didn't flinch when she appeared from the shadows, her royal face pale beneath the grime. He simply looked at her, then back to his work. "I am on the run, Akar. My father believes I am a traitor. Ifri wants me dead. The truth of the pharaoh's power, the source, it is all a lie. I need a swift horse and passage to Abydos on the desert road." Akar paused, his massive hand resting on a saddle. "The desert road is the path of death, princess. The royal guards will assume you are on the Nile." "Then the desert road it is," Neferet insisted. My brother, Khafre, is to be sacrificed to fuel the lies. Ifri knows this. My father knows this. I will not let it happen." Akar looked into her eyes. He saw not a desperate princess, but the blazing conviction of a truth-seeker. He had seen too many sacrifices, too many quiet purges over the years to believe in the divine purity of the throne. He walked over to a dark stall, pulling out a magnificent desert-bred mare named Khafra, the appearing of Ra, known for her unmatched stamina. "Khafra will take you fast, princess, but the cost is high. You will owe me a favor. Not now, when you have destroyed the lies, and if you survive, you will owe Akar one favor, to be named later. It is the only way I can protect my family." "Done," Neferet agreed instantly. She knew Akar's favor wouldn't be for wealth, but for justice. He gave her a small purse of coins, 3 water skins, and a bag of dried dates. More importantly, he gave her a final, vital piece of information. The royal garrison at the Fayum Oasis uses a secret communication system. It's a series of aligned signal fires, not smoke, but colored flames. If Ifri knows you're on the desert road, he will use them to track you. Watch the colors. Black means no concern. White means royal distress. Red means kill on sight.
Neferet nodded, absorbing the instruction. She mounted Khafra, her heart pounding a rhythm against the mare's strong flank. "Go, princess," Akar urged, slapping the horse's hindquarters. "The sun will be up soon. May Thoth guide your mind." Flight into the unknown. Neferet rode hard into the pre-dawn gloom, leaving the comforting scent of the Nile's fertile mud far behind. The desert was a vast, silent ocean of sand and rock, unforgiving and devoid of the comfort of the divine omnipotence she had grown up with. The irony was not lost on her. She had been sheltered in a kingdom built on technological illusion, only to find salvation in the primitive, true reality of the earth and the skill of an outsider. She rode for 12 relentless hours, pushing Khafra beyond a normal pace. As the second night descended, a single flickering light appeared on the far horizon, the Fayum Oasis. And then she saw it. A small, isolated tower on a ridge overlooking the oasis, and from its peak a flame blossomed. It wasn't black or white. It was a piercing, unmistakable red. Vizier Iri knew her path. His agents were ahead of her, likely setting up an ambush near the oasis, believing her exhausted and desperate for water. The red signal fire was a direct kill order, broadcast across the lonely, vast wilderness. Neferet jerked on the reins, turning Khafra away from the oasis and into the broken, rocky wilderness to the west, a terrible detour that would add days to her journey but keep her alive. She was now completely cut off, trusting only in the stamina of her horse and the vague hope that the guardians of the stellar archives would trust the coded plea of a fugitive princess. She was alone in the desert, hunted by the very kingdom she was trying to save, racing against time to reach a hidden temple and claim the key, the scepter, that would either destroy Egypt or set it free. The Shroud of Silence. Neferet rode for 3 brutal days, battling the desert's relentless hostility. She avoided the known wells and oases, surviving on the meager rations Akar had provided and the sheer will of the mare, Khafra. The red signal fire at Fayum had been a clear warning. Iri wasn't relying on mere patrols. He was using the ancient system of aligned communication towers, a remnant of the First Peoples Network, to hunt her. He was treating her as a technological threat, not a mere fugitive.
She realized the desert was their chessboard, and she was the isolated pawn. Her only defense was speed and a relentless commitment to the most difficult path. The desert's hostility was, ironically, her best ally against the organized tyranny of the Nile Valley. On the fourth evening, utterly exhausted and hallucinating from dehydration, Neferet finally saw it. A cluster of unusual rock formations in the distance, distinct from the surrounding landscape. It was the place of the guardians of the stellar archives, hidden deep in the desolate western desert. The temple wasn't the grand, sun-drenched monument like those on the Nile. It was a complex of buildings carved deep into a black, igneous rock cliff, designed to be invisible from above. No massive pylons, no booming chants, only silence and shadow. Neferet dismounted, leading the spent Khafra toward a narrow, shadowed entrance. Her hand, clutching the black wood like a talisman, found the small carved symbol she was looking for, the stylized scorpion mark. She pressed the scorpion's tail. A low, grinding sound echoed in the stone. A section of the rock wall, disguised with masterful precision, slid inward, revealing a cool, damp passage. The guardians of Abydos. Inside, the air was immediately different, cool, moist, and smelling strongly of myrrh and aged papyrus. Neferet stepped into a vast, cavernous hall. It was a library, larger and older than the royal archives in Memphis, its walls lined not with hieroglyphic scrolls, but with rows upon rows of clay tablets and metal sheets inscribed with geometric equations and unknown scripts. Before a desk carved from dark wood sat a man in simple, unadorned white linen. He was ancient, his skin a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes clear and startlingly intelligent. This was the High Guardian, Hesi, the scholar Khayyam Waset had trusted. "We have been expecting you, Princess Neferet. The coded message from Khayyam Waset reached us via the desert scribes 3 days ago. He told us a divine princess was coming to awaken the truth. I am no princess, Hesi. I am a fugitive, and there are no gods. There is only a system of control, powered by the life force of the royal family, and Irie intends to keep it running." Hesi smiled faintly, a knowing look passing across his face. "We know, child. We wrote the operating manual. This archive is not dedicated to the worship of Thoth, but to the memory of Jedefra, the pharaoh who understood that the gods were just highly advanced, forgotten technology. We call the system the Perpetual Engine." Hesi gestured to a series of metallic sheets on his desk. The said ritual, the sonic hypnosis, the pyramid amplifiers, it was all designed by Jedefra to stabilize the Nile's chaotic weather patterns after a great catastrophe. But he warned that the system would eventually require a life force fuel source to maintain its harmony. He sealed the knowledge and gave the key, the harmonic tuner, to his loyal viziers, trusting them to find an ethical alternative before the first sacrifice. They didn't, Neferet finished bitterly. They chose power. They chose survival, which became power, and they made the ultimate mistake. They forgot the science and kept only the ritual. They became high priests to a machine. Reclaiming the scepter. "Where is the scepter, Hesi?" Neferet asked urgently. "In the place of its original design," Hesi said, walking over to a deep niche in the rock wall. He reached into the recess and pulled out the shining blue metal scepter. It hummed softly, and Neferet felt an immediate magnetic pull, a sense of innate understanding.
Kamweset was brilliant, Hesi explained. He understood that the scepter is not just a tuner, it is a master key, the console to the entire perpetual engine. But merely possessing it is useless. You must learn to tune it. It operates on 4 different resonance frequencies. Hesse placed his hand on the scepter, and the glowing patterns on its surface shifted. He pointed to the patterns. The Ra frequency, green, used for the hypnotic induction of absolute loyalty and stability. This is the constant hum over the Nile Valley. Tune it higher, and the population becomes mindlessly devoted. Tune it lower, and they descend into anarchy. The Set frequency, red, the counter frequency. It causes massive destabilizing feedback in the power grid. You used its echo when you disrupted the Memphis reactor with the black wood. Using it fully would destroy the pyramids and collapse the entire system, but it would kill millions in the resulting chaos. The Ma'at frequency, gold. This is the control frequency. It allows for precise adjustments to the power flow, stabilizing the weather without the need for life force. It requires a calm, centered mind to operate. The Thoth frequency, blue-white. This is the true secret. It does not control the engine, but rather allows the user to interface with the engine's deep memory banks, the data of the first people. With this, you could find the master shutdown command. Neferet carefully took the scepter. The cold, humming metal felt like an extension of her own will. She was no longer just a princess. She was the architect of Kemet's destiny, armed with the tools of its hidden past. "Where is Kamweset?" Neferet asked, her voice grim. Hesse sighed, placing his hands together. Vizier Iri took him to the Great Pyramid of Khufu, the primary amplifier. He believes Kamweset can tune the scepter for him to stabilize the system after your sabotage. Iri has moved up the timeline. He is preparing to initiate the emergency life force transfer now to save the malfunctioning engine. He will use Khafre's life force regardless of the date. Neferet felt a spike of terror mixed with determination. "He's going to sacrifice my brother early. I have to go to Giza." "The journey is 3 weeks by caravan, 3 days by your path. You will not make it in time. But there is one way. The first people built their power grids not just on land, but in the air." Hesse led her to a hidden chamber deeper within the rock. In the center, covered in fine sand, was a large, shallow metal dish inscribed with the Ma'at frequency symbol. It is a translocation pad, a forgotten means of rapid travel. We have maintained its core energy, but it requires an immense surge of power from the harmonic tuner to activate. You must learn to focus the Ma'at frequency to use it. Now, princess, your training begins.